this is the forecast says that it will drop down to 18% in 2017. Now, how this will be achieved is one big question. I think possibly in the previous decades, we have seen the impacts of growth. Higher growth has led to reduction of poverty in Bangladesh, but it's now. I think the impact is now dropping. Like if you look at the growth poverty elasticity values, which I got from a PRI study recently, it is around between 2016-22, it is now minus 0.8. It was earlier, in the earlier 5 year, it was minus 0.84. So it is dropping, and perhaps possibly in the next 5 year, it will be around minus 0.7%. So it means that 10% point increase in growth will reduce poverty by 7% only. Now, if you look at the global literature, the average is -2. So that means 10% increase in real growth will reduce poverty by 20%. So Bangladesh is lagging behind in terms of that. So I think the growth will not be able to reduce poverty in the near future or in the medium and long term in Bangladesh. So we need to find out other ways to reduce poverty. On the other hand, we look at the Gini coefficient. I think Gini coefficient is very alarming. Like it is now 34.2. We have never seen like the Gini in Bangladesh like that. And the forecast for 27, is almost 37. I think we have never seen Gini like that. So what is the story behind that? I still don't know. But I think since World Bank has done it, so they must have some analysis behind that. I could not get the full understanding of how this Gini will be so high. But if this story is right, then you have a big challenge in front of the next government and the also current government also. Like so, one thing is that if you look at also literature, I think the growth will not reduce Gini, that we know. So growth can reduce poverty, but Gini has to have other instruments. But if you look at the global literature on inequality, we find that the best way to reduce poverty, inequality, is to have an effective transfer mechanism. Fiscal redistribution system. And if you look at the OECD study, OECD countries, IMF study, and Human Development Report on inequality, I think in OECD countries, they have been able to reduce inequality by 0.18%. Now, out of that, like the role of or the contribution of transfer was 0.4%, almost 80%. And the rest is coming from the tax system, it is progressive tax system. So in the case of Bangladesh, we need to see how we can actually have those kind of instruments. Now, where this money will come from? We have a serious problem. Ashik said the shame of pyramid. We have been talking about this. Now the tax GDP ratio 6.6%. This is shame for any country. And the country with a per capita income of $3,000 almost. And we are far behind of Nepal, 10 percentage point behind Nepal. And if you look at Cambodia, they have, like, you haven't shown that, but they have a tax GDP ratio of 21% with similar kind of per capita income. So why Bangladesh is not is lagging behind is a big question. And I think Dr. Zaidi Sattar is leading the reform. Is a big, task in front of him, like how we can actually change this culture in Bangladesh to raise revenue. And I think if this continues, Bangladesh will not be able to actually finance our, prepare budget. And how do you prepare your budget? If with this 6% point, I think the next year, if we have 5% deficit, our budget will be 11% of GDP, which is the lowest in the world, perhaps, I think. So with this kind of fiscal space, where will you get the money for the social protection? Now, social protection has serious problem also, not only money. I think the number that the government is putting, like 2.2% or 2.5% of GDP, is highly, overly, I think, inflated number. They have put all the schemes into social protection to make it like decent. Now, if you look at the social protection scheme within the budget, their components, hardly, I think, 1% is actually allocated for the poor. The rest are basically non-poor allocations. We are putting subsidy, then like Sanchoy Patro income, these are all putting into then pension for the government employee, all these are put into social protection. So now we need to have we have PRI led the, I think the preparation of the 2015 National Social Security Strategy. And within the 10 years, we should have reached most of the implement most of the recommendations that we put in this report, but progress has been very slow. We have not been able to implement most of the recommendations that were put in there. I think I will stop. I will recommend two things. Monzur is here. He can take note. And one is that we need to have a critical review of the social protection system now, and then try to find out what can be done, focusing on efficiency, on digitalization, social insurance, labor market intervention policy, and also social care, which will be very important for Bangladesh, as aging is becoming a very important issue in Bangladesh also. Finally, also, I think all the discussion on poverty and inequality is based on microdata. We don't have any macro evidence in that one. Why? Because we are not doing the income GDP that we should have done. The income GDP provides a better understanding of what are the distribution of the GDP by labor share, operating surplus, by capital share, depreciation, and income. And these are the recommendations by System of National Account 2008 and 2025. Each country should produce supply use statement that provide three types of GDP, like production GDP, expenditure GDP, income GDP. I will also request Dr. Monzur is there to talk to DBS, so whether they can start implementing or estimating the income GDP. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Khanakar, for a very stimulating presentation, and your raising the concern about the weakening of the poverty growth nexus, and also pointing out that income inequality in Bangladesh has been, it's the latest World Bank assessment of poverty and inequality is to be taken seriously. We are in a very deep problem, and we have to hear our colleague from the government to tell us what the government really plans to do, what priority policies can be undertaken. And it's very interesting that you point out our GDP national accounts estimates, we are the only national account estimate production side figure. GDP is GDP to estimate 3-4 রকম আছে, production side আছে, expenditure side আছে, তারপরে income estimate আছে. আমরা production side most valid. The other ones, the expenditure estimate is really a residual, if I'm not mistaken. So আমরা basically production side আছে, expenditure side আরো শক্ত করতে হবে, আর তারপরে the income side, income estimate of GDP, এটা একান্ত দরকার, সামনে we have to get into that. Thank you very much for all these ideas, and may I now move to our friend and colleague, the founder and chairman of the Policy Exchange, and a very prolific economics commentator in Cal. So, Dr. Monzur, you're welcome to share your views and insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sattar, for your kind words and kind introduction. Dr. Sattar, today's chair, our very dear Monzur Bhai, Dr. Monzur Hossain, chief guest, presenter, my dear brother Ashikur, and all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen around the table. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Congratulations once again, Ashikur. You have presented a very structured, very sharp snapshot of the macro dynamics over the last month. Brings out a number of very pertinent issues as policymakers, analysts, private sector, our bilateral and multilateral partners debate on the key priorities and risks for our growth. I think, Budlu Bhai, I really call him Babu Bhai. Babu Bhai, you have highlighted a number of very important issues, particularly the poverty aspects of that and the poverty measures, the income measures, as well as the big elephant in the room, that is social protection. So that's great. So I'll just add to that from two particular perspectives. Growth has been central to this presentation, and it's central to the discussion we're having. So, in general, the economic policy discussion that we are having around the town. The government just published the fiscal 24-25 growth for 3.69. I think the projections for 25-26 by our multilateral partners have mostly been revised down to less than 5%. And that too would be subject to a number of assumptions remaining valid. We see clearly there are multiple drivers or determinants to how the growth will proceed and where it is now. But I see two particular issues. One, the consumption, and the second is investments. If we look at, Ashik mentioned about the Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, that Policy Exchange and Metropolitan Chamber we jointly introduced about a year and a half ago, which is the most commonly used economic dynamism measurement index around the world. If you look at the last month, September PMI, it has inched up marginally from, I think, 58.3 to 59.1. This is a marginal increase, right? So it's on an expansion. Above 50 is still expansion, but it's a very weak expansion, 59.1. But what is interesting is while construction after many months have rebounded, primarily building on the end of the monsoon, because monsoon has a direct impact on the cycle of seasonality cycle of the construction, but also rollout of the national budget for FY 25-26 from July 1, and we see some reflection in that. But what is also interesting is to see the slump in services. And that is denoting a slump in consumption that we have seen consistently in the past year. This is no surprise, given the inflation again, a very important point that Ashik mentioned in his presentation. Dr. Sattar gave some very valid, important reasons which initiated the inflation back in April, May 2022. I mean, this upward rise in the inflation, which at one point went up as high as close to 14%. So based on some good interventions in the last 15 months, it has now come down, but let's be honest, it's still a very high inflation rate. It's close to 9%, it's very high. And it is eroding the purchasing power, the consumption, and it is also hitting the cost of business, which ultimately is hitting the output from an economic, industrial, and service level. So long the inflation doesn't come under bearable level, I think the consumption is going to remain a drag, and the services will perhaps continue to post drops or at best very weak or sluggish growth. And with 54-55% of the GDP coming from the service sector, this will continue to remain a big problem for us. Inflation, Ukraine war was a big one in 2022. The 24 months slide in the currency value, 41% up till May 2024 was a big issue. But the big question is why it's showing upward trend in September, in October. I mean, October is yet to be published, but August, September September had upward increase in all three, general, food, non-food. August also had upward trend in one of the inflation. I think supply remains now the biggest constraint in the market. If we look at the import scenario, in July, August of current fiscal year, imports are showing a 4% increase, but it is still nowhere close to where the import used to be before the import compressions were slapped in 2023 in response to the sliding foreign reserve and fluctuating or volatile foreign exchange. So Bangladesh Bank in the last 14-15 months, they've maintained the conservative monetary policy very rightly, and I think at least another period of monetary policy is going to be required on this very conservative approach with high 10% policy rate. They have also reduced high-powered money printing. So That used to be a problem until July 2024. If you recall, the fiscal 23-24 had in Bangladeshi taka 60,000 crore, 60 billion taka in high-powered money printing. That has come down to less than half in the last 15 months. And this is unavoidable, what is being printed now. Number of banks needed stability support and some other reasons, but at least it has been reduced. But what is not in control is still supply and the market manipulation. The market manipulation still remains wild, wild west. There are, at best laughable, hilarious attempt to take that. Bangla ekটু বলতে বলা হয়েছিল, Bangla English মিলে বলি আমরা, what we see is suddenly a government committee or a committee from Federation FDCCI, they visit a retail kitchen market or a retail market. There are 2 million retail units in Bangladesh. And before the products hit the retail units, it comes usually on an average through 4 stages of supply chain layers. And what do you do by visiting 2 or 3 retail huts or kitchen markets once in 3 months? Cannot really detect manipulation rather than, or let alone stopping that. So enforcement, detection tools, monitoring mechanisms, institutional capacity in Competition Commission and other relevant government agencies, they still remain a far cry. এবং সেই জন্য inflation আমাদের একটা বড় drag এখনো রয়ে যাচ্ছে. The other one is investment. Overall private investment to GDP remains stagnant to 23%. This is not last 2 years, by the way. This is perhaps last 8 to 10 years. There are structural, long-standing constraints in the overall investment climate and the investment, strategy. Now, government has proudly claimed that, statistically this is right, that FY 2024, in 24-25, investment went up by 11%. Sorry, 16%. FY 24-25. FDI. I'm talking about FDI. April to June, the last quarter of previous fiscal year, went up by 11%. FDI. Yes, good news on the surface, no doubt. But then if you go deeper into that, more than 60% is reinvestments. That means not net new investment, greenfield investments are not coming, which is detrimental to job creation, sector diversification, and capacity enhancement in new sectors, right? So as a result, and 2 weeks ago, we launched the other index that we do, the Bangladesh Business Climate Index, which is the annual homegrown index to measure the business environment quality. Again, there is an insignificant improvement, I think somewhere from 58 to 59. But the improvement is so insignificant, you can literally ignore that. And why I say that, it is still in the category of severe bottlenecks exist in the business environment, immediate and comprehensive reforms necessary. That's the category denoted by the score, number 1. There are 11 pillars, business, licensing and entry, land, infrastructure, taxation, enforcement of contract/dispute resolution, trade facilitation, technology adoption. 6 out of 11 took a dip. 5 out of 11 took marginal improvement. None of them going to the yellow category, which is improving business environment. And certainly this was our 4th annual edition. In the 4 years, none of the pillars made it to the green category, which is a friendly business environment, right? And access to finance, which made an improvement, the single largest improvement, building on the improving foreign exchange access, LC relaxation, and the confidence on the banking sector being revived. But it continues to remain in the red category, which is a very difficult business environment area. And that continues to hurt the overall investment climate. So until we bring the inflation under control and thereby allow services to gain, and we bring investment back to at least some growth level, I think the overall growth is going to remain constrained. The 2 risks, I'll finish in 1 minute, Dr. Sattar. The 2 big, I don't see them as immediate risk, but 2 issues which might put the growth back to a downward trajectory. would be banking as well as the external sector management. For now, we are doing well with the stability in the exchange rate. It's fairly stable, even after the May 14th move to the relatively free floating model. But our imports are while improving, but still constrained. As and when we move to the full import stage, which is going to be required for the supply normalization for the growth, we'll have to see how it plays. And bear in mind, our energy import costs are increasing. Our debt servicing obligations are increasing. Just this year, first 9 months of fiscal 25, which ended in June, interest rate expense went up by 10%. Interest rate payment on external borrowing went up by 23%. So we'll have to consider those in terms of our projections for foreign exchange demand and supply. And on the second thing that I see as a risk is the banking capital adequacy that he mentioned. NPL is now it's a sunk cost for us. We are down with this. I think we have great faith in the current central bank regime to devise a way to see how we can best minimize our losses. There is no good way out of that. However, I see some slowdown in some of the solutions. For example, an asset management company, stressed asset management company, law should have been put in place by now. Institutional mechanism should have been placed by now. But we don't see that. So the 5 banks getting consolidated, we still don't know how their NPLs are going to show up in new books, or they're going to be transferred. If transferred, there's no vehicle to absorb that. So, and then capital adequacy, the sector average, it's below the regulatory requirement, which is 10%. What they call the CAR, the risk-weighted average ratio, right? Asset capital to risk-weighted average asset ratio. The sector average is just over 6%. The minimum requirement is 10%. 21 banks out of 61 does not meet the minimum requirements. If some banks get 16 to 17%, they get gold standard. Even the best performing banks in Bangladesh are somewhere around 14 to 15%. So this capital adequacy has not received enough attention yet from the central bank side. It's in the problem list, but this I see as another major threat to the growth. So thank you very much to PRI for having me here again, and congratulations on the latest MMI.
Thank you, Dr. Monzur. You brought in some very critical issues onto the table, and you have deep contacts with the private sector, so you know where the shoe pinches. So these are very critical elements, and when you talk of inflation, one of the things, and price rises in the marketplace. One of the things that I said, how do you reduce prices in the market? And I always say, number one, increase supply. Number two, increase supply. Number three, increase supply. So supply is what really, so supply can be domestic supply from domestic production, or it can be from imports. And it's good that you pointed out that we had this import restraint going on, which is definitely not helpful for the inflation situation. You see, international prices are well below Bangladesh price levels. So imports, if you open up imports, you have some reduction in prices anyway, though tariffs are so high that continue to maintain domestic prices at significantly higher levels compared to international prices. But thankfully, the import restraints have
Gradually relaxed.
Almost disappeared, according to the Bangladesh Bank right now. And opening LC is no longer a problem with the kind of foreign exchange reserves that we now have. And we have an exchange rate flexibility, which really supports not only exchange rate reserve stability, but also helps to accumulate reserves. So the exchange rate flexibility, অনেক সময় বেশি importance দেই না, but it is actually at the bottom of বর্তমানে যে balance of payments stability restore হয়েছে, foreign exchange reserve stability restore হয়েছে, এগুলি কিন্তু exchange rate flexibility এবং এটা flexibility আরো রাখা উচিত আমার মনে হয়। the new issue, the band workout to 2.5% band haircut. I don't know if it's very meaningful. So thank you. Very good points, I think, coming up on the table. Now may I move to our next distinguished panelist, our young panelist from the Magna Group. She will give us the private sector perspective on what is going on. So Ms. Tanjina Mustafa, Director, Magna Group of Industries.
Thank you so much. Good morning, honorable chief guests, our chair. I mean, Dr. Riaz has pretty much covered everything that I had to speak about. So I think it's wonderful. It gives me an opportunity to sort of add a little bit from a business perspective. One of the things that we as a business struggle with is the missing link between the policies and the targets. So when the government sets a target, companies like ours, we buy into that vision and we invest. So Magna Group was one of the first companies to have private economic zones. Now our Kumil economic zone has been ready for the past over a year, but we are yet to receive GAT, even the amount to sort of take over the machineries from the mission companies. So this is backed by IMF, this is backed by HSBC, by Chinese. So lenders are getting frustrated because we cannot operate. If in operation, it would create over thousands of jobs. The intention for these economic zones was to provide a one-stop solution to businesses. Now, no investors are obviously considering Kumil economic zone because we can't have the basic gas supply. So for the last 1.5 years, we're sitting idle. That's core lost productivity. When we will have some visibility on that, we're yet to find out. As the Dr. Sattar said, the LC situation is much better. We have visibility there in terms of, when we have an import plan, we know we'll be able to open the LCs on time. But what happened during the 2022-23 dollar fluctuation and the serious currency crunch is that Bangladesh earned a title of country risk, which means the companies and their banks don't want to bank with the majority of the Bangladeshi banks. So they say, we select these 5 banks, these are the banks we're going to accept an LC from, and you must give us a confirmed LC from a first-class bank. That is a direct cost to the import of our goods. Any goods coming in, if the financial cost is, the cost of importing it is added 3%, 3.5%, who's going to pay for it? Obviously, it has to trickle down to the customers. On the flip side, we have something called single borrower's limit, which means that a company like Magna, who imports over $3 billion worth of goods, we have to be able to bank with 30, 35 banks, but these banks are not accepted by the sellers. So they tell us this bank, and then if they trust us, convince them, please accept the LC from this bank, that's okay, but the confirmation charge is higher than usual. So all these get added to our import cost, and it's an inflationary component. The other point that I want to discuss is that when one of the recent targets of our government is to get a better position with the tariff situation. We are importers of soybean, which is one of the pain points of US right now, is the soybean, because China stopped buying and a majority of the beans they're looking for other destinations. So we go in and we promise to help the government to import soybean, and we have imported about 350 million worth of beans. But, and please forgive me if it's a little technical, when we crush these beans, one of the components, which is about 85% of the output, is soy meal. Now, meal is, when the crushers came into the business, meal had a duty. Right now, that has been abolished. So on one side, the government is asking us to import soybean. On the other side, we have a restriction into where we will sell the soybean that we're importing, because the meal is uncompetitive because it's coming duty free from lower quality Argentina, Brazil. It's duty free. On the other side, as Dr. Sattar was saying, supply. Inflation is going to be controlled, but now the Ramadan is coming, we're having pressures because we're importers of raw commodities, essential commodities, sugar, soybean. The price is set by some agencies as to, say, oil. if there's a disparity, so anyone with the internet can see what the price of oil is today. It can be monitored, yes, definitely monitor us, check, properly, as Dr. Riaz was saying. But if it's set arbitrarily, that this is the price of soybean that you're allowed to sell today, if you look into the import data, you will see that in preparation of Ramadan, we should have had a big influx of soybean oil, but the importers are deemed because importers are reluctant. They're nervous that if the price is set at a price which does not make sense to them, they're not interested to import and sell. So right now, it might not hit us, but a couple of months down the line, when there will be a good demand for soybean oil, there will be pure supply and demand game. There won't be enough supply for oil. I will not go into a lot more details which I have from a business perspective, but I guess what we need is stability. We need visibility and rules that are implemented equally. It doesn't matter which business house knows which minister, but the rules will be equal, implemented, monitored, and Bangladesh is an economy, one thing, I think we have great promises, and we can achieve those goals faster. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very, very important points that you have raised, and I'm glad that you also pointed out the importance of imports. You see, we always talk about export promotion and exports leading the economy, but imports are just as important. We can't have growth and we can't have export expansion without imports, particularly when we are relying on the manufacturing sector's performance. So imports are essential. Now, when it comes to some of the, the food, agro-food imports, there I think we have a problem of protecting producers and at the same time offering lower prices to the consumers, and there's a conflict there, and you pointed it out. I don't know if there's a very easy solution there, because currently I think soybean oil tariffs are the lowest. I think it's just a 5%, I think, VAT or something. So there is a conflict between protecting domestic producers and providing low prices for consumers. So that will remain, but we have to. But more important is there has to be policy service, and it has to be rule-based and equal for all. That I agree, and I think we all of us. So thank you very much. I think we had a very rich presentation, as well as the discussions from our distinguished panelists. May I now open the floor for some? And begin with, let me invite His Excellency Ambassador from South Korea, Ambassador Park from South Korea. South Korean Ambassador to Bangladesh.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. Before I have a schedule, so before I leave, I try to look forward. So that creates this best pool in terms of FDI. The capacity is now the investment. It's very simple. Main reason is that Bangladesh now trying to limit the repatriation of profits to country.
Also capital.
That's why the most of the FDI comes from the investment. So it means that Bangladesh needed to secure purely is greenfield investment. This is very important. Number two, regarding the economic growth, most important is the private investment expansion. Now, it's the expansion. The level of private investment is half of the regular. For example, now as far as I know, this the expansion is a 6.35 something, but previous time normally is more than 30. It's now investment level private sector is very low. That's why the economic growth is now downward. So very simple. Let it come to the power. The private sector will start using investments. This is very important. And also inflation. Inflation is more than 8%. It's still very high. The Pakistan saw 3%. The Sri Lanka is 1.5%. So still Bangladesh very high inflation. Also regarding central bank, there are two issues. One is that the exchange system was trying to pressure from IMF to implement the flexible exchange rates. Problem now is that central bank is trying to now combining the US dollars from now commercial bank to maintain the backup, the depreciating rates to promote the exposure. So now the IMF now is making some raising that Congress needs to principally implement the flexible foreign exchange system. Number two is that the independence is very, very important. So one case is that we can see, the Turkey cases. Turkey is a few times their extreme. The governor of the central bank was changed by the president. See, what is the result is high inflation. So that are much depreciated. So the Turkey economy is now undergoing a very bad time. So independence of the central bank is very, very important. And then the reciprocal tariff impact, very, very important, I think. We need to more have time to look at what is going on, the impact from the application of US reciprocal tariff. This is important, but one thing Bangladesh already agreed to impose. So a lot of the US goods are promised that price is very high compared to Ukraine or Russia. The price is very high. So this is another thing. So lastly, I would like to mention is the anticipation. Now, I make also very clear that the sixth tranche will be given after election. It's very clear that it means that Bangladesh needs to continue economic reform. You mentioned there are one, banking sector, the 30% and non-performing loan is very high. Number two is tax collection. Not only tax collection, how to the tax reform. Tax reform also very, very important. Also that kind of the policy is required to continue the reforms. That's why the differing and this graduation is not answer. I think that, but probably the problem is that Bangladesh only trying to delay the graduation releasing while Laos, PRI and Nepal trying to go ahead as scheduled. So thank you for giving me a chance.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Excellency, Ambassador Bangladesh. He has to leave, so. But anyway, we can proceed with this matter. The floor is open. May I invite our colleague from the UNDP? Always takes the trouble of giving us some time, so may we hear him out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zaidi. Here, chief guest. Already a lot of things said. It's very rich. I wish I had the time to think, to reflect, and then come back maybe tomorrow or to make to share some thoughts with you. But maybe I'll talk about 2 points. One is about growth, GDP. Of course, GDP numbers, they usually, the reaction is, we get these animated debates, especially among the economists. But I think there was an article in The Economist a couple of years ago. All these projections that institutions at the global level have made and economists have made, they did an assessment of that in the last, I think, decade and a half. We were not even close to meeting it. Or if we had randomly used the coin, we probably would have made the same sort of estimates would have come as close as that. But it's, I think as economists, we have to be humble. Because it's not an easy exercise to estimate about something about future. But it gives us a sense of where we are heading towards, especially numbers that we're looking at quarterly basis. What is, of course, is clear that growth is slowing down, not only in Bangladesh, it's happening in many other countries. Now, growth is important for people to enjoy prosperity. We do need more growth, and you talked about social protection. I'll come to that. And I think the research clearly shows there is a limitation in terms of redistribution. In order to have inclusive growth, you do need policies and actions that focus on redistribution. Now, that's a very difficult and challenging task. It's understandable. I think if you look at the Gini coefficient, the rise, there has been concentration of wealth, income. That has to change, and that's where inclusive growth comes in. And the growth that we saw in the R&D sector, of course, it helped to promote prosperity. People got good jobs. And how do you encourage people to engage in the growth process? It's primarily through jobs, wage employment, or through enterprises. So that source of growth, I cannot see that outside R&D at the moment. We need to think about it, the real sector, where that source of growth is going to come from, where these jobs, productive jobs, are going to come from. So it requires that structural transformation of the economy. And then, of course, that will, as an economy as a whole, it will grow. The second point is about monetary policy, how effective it can be. Again, we won't be able to agree on it. What we have seen in Bangladesh, and we did some work, UNDP did some work on inflation. There are a lot of supply side issues that are driving inflation. It started as a supply shock. Yes, you can have a restrictive monetary policy, and seems it's affecting the inflation. But we also have to take into account that in developing countries, the relationship between monetary policy and inflation is still weak, unlike what you see in more developed countries, because of the large informal sector. So we need to take that into account. There are supply side issues at play. How do you address them? We heard about Competition Commission. We did a institutional diagnostic of Competition Commission. So those kind of institutions need to be strengthened so that they can play a more active role in addressing some of those supply side issues. And Dr. Zaidi Sattar also talked about supply in terms of trade and all that. So there are a number of other factors that we need to take into account and not rely only on the monetary sector. And one final point about the independence of the central bank, it might be, I missed that discussion you had a few weeks ago. I think it would be also interesting or useful to look at the experience of countries like UK, Australia, Indonesia that have separated this supervision of banks and the monetary policy. Whether that's something that can be considered here in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Perry from the UNDP. I think you've hit on a very important points here. Projections by economists, even projections by the multilateral organizations, they do not necessarily really work out in at very end. If I look at the projections made by the IMF or the World Bank on Bangladesh growth for the last 25 years, I've noticed that actual growth has always exceeded their projections. So if they've downgraded the growth rate to 4.8, 4.9% for FY 2026, I wouldn't be surprised if the growth rate is actually more than 5%, provided things work out, particularly the elections are held peacefully and everything, and there's a change of government, a new government comes in. So there is some political stability. If we have that, Bangladesh is poised to grow much faster. This 4% or under 4% growth is not Bangladesh, growth momentum. Bangladesh economy has an internal growth momentum that is much higher than this 4 or under 4%. I hope our chief guest would reflect on that. He's in charge of these growth rates for the government right now. Okay, so with that, may I also invite any others? Please introduce yourself and I request you to be. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Monzur, President, Australia Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I think a lot of points to discuss, but in the speed of time is very short. I want to go for an inflation issue. I really could not understand the inflation. To protect the inflation, the government taken the policy, increase the interest rate, banking interest rate. One should interest rate increase. We have seen why interest rate is supposed to be down lower, but then control conservative monetary policy. These two policies taken not only yesterday, day before yesterday, I mean a few months, say several months before taken, but whether inflation reduced. So I couldn't really understand. By increasing interest rate, you are collapsing our business people. We could not really do the business. How can you do the business? Interest rate 15% will is 20%. And whether it is possible for making money. And on the other hand, you are saying that consumer products availability should be there. How it is possible? We should go to the bank, 100% bank margin they wanted for opening the LC even. So it is very difficult. So this is one very important point. I find that the poverty level here, it is poor became poorer. Middle class people became poorer. This situation, environment is as such, economic condition is as such. It is not improving or increasing. So here must be addressed something, I have seen some other country, even in India, for the poorest people, they have some policy. And the poorest, how to survive, they have the policy. I just came from China. You see, the 100 kilometers they are flying by bus, taking a 1 RMB for the poor people. And they are making a market for the kitchen market for the poorer people, which these people buying 30 RMB, poor people buying a 10 RMB. So this sort of the policy, or even rationing for Bangladeshi people, Bangladeshi poor people, it is not there. So really a big portion of population, it is 22% of the population became a below poverty level. How you can think that economy will grow? So this is many other issues are already there, So it is not possible to me address all this point. And everybody is asking, the good governance is not there, our policy is not really proper. In front of our LSE graduation is there. Still, I do not know whether it will be delayed or not. So if it is there, LSE graduation, then really can we make it as achievement? We can do it. I am really very surprising. And again, banking. The banking system is in such a position now. So many banks now already collapsed. They are not even giving our money is keeping in the bank. They are not returning money. They are saying come every week 10,000 taka or something like this. So how it is really the banking? Many of our banks in Bangladesh is not accepted by the international banks. Our LC is not there accepting. So you see, these are many issues. I think we cannot really sustain our business. Again, the things you are thinking for increase or improvement of the economy of the country, but your retention of the economy you are not thinking. Just yesterday I have seen the report. 256 of the R&D industry is closed, collapsed. So how many people are already lost their job? So we cannot really maintain our retention in its production is not possible.
Don't believe in all news.
No, sustainability. You see, sustainability of any business or any growth is needed. Growth is needed. But we are now stagnant because of the uncertainties there. I think time is very short. So say more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Uncertainty, Josh. अच्छा ठीक है না আপনি যে পলিসি কনফ্লিক্টের কথা বলছেন যে এদিকে ইন্টারেস্ট রেট বাড়িয়ে দিচ্ছেন টু কন্ট্রোল ইনফ্লেশন কিভাবে সম্ভব, কারণ আপনারা যখন সাপ্লাই বাড়াতে যাচ্ছেন ইম্পোর্ট করে এই রেট সিকিউরিটি অসুবিধা হচ্ছে, একটা ইনভেস্টমেন্ট সেরকম এগুলো বাট ওই একটা সমস্যা আছে, কন্ট্রোলিং ইনফ্লেশন হ্যাজ কস্ট। এবং আমেরিকা যেটা পল ওয়ালকার যে মানে ইনফ্লেশন একেবারে 2% নামিয়ে এনেছিল, রিসেশন করে দিয়ে তারপরে মানে ইকোনমিকে একেবারে কন্ট্রোল করে দিয়ে তারপরে ইনফ্লেশন কন্ট্রোল করছে। তো আমরা তো এটা করতে পারি না, আমাদের একটু লিমিটেশন আছে। ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ। মে আই নাও ইনভাইট জর্জ ফ্রম দি অস্ট্রেলিয়ান হাই কমিশন?
Yeah, just a few words on behalf of the Australian High Commission. Thank you, Chair, and congratulations again, Dr. Ashik. Just a few points, I guess, on the sort of our private sector engagement. I know sort of goes off topic with regards to the previous conversation, but we just wanted to highlight a business roundtable that we're looking to organize on the 13th of November. We're looking to invite some of our key business stakeholders, of course, as well, Syed, our president of the Australia-Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but also, for example, companies like Zaidi Group. We understand we traded with Australia in the past in quite amounts. And really, this business roundtable will be a closed-door discussion, and we'll use this roundtable to inform the discussions that we'll have with the Bangladesh government for our fourth senior official talks in relation to trade and investment. So just wanted to highlight that particular opportunity for businesses to be involved. If you'd like to sort of make a comment or to raise any issues, for example, whether it be with banks on the Australian side that you may be wanting to trade more with. But apart from that, congratulations again. And again, we're really pleased to sort of sponsor forums like this. As Dr. Riaz mentioned, he also sponsored the dissemination of the Bangladesh Business Report. So we also encourage you to sort of take a look online at that report in terms of the statistics there and the insights. But yeah, I don't want to hold us up with the presentation from our chief guest. So thank you, Chair.
Anyway, I missed out on thanking DFAT for being a great supporter of the business climate index that we.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Kushik came in late. Yes, and Executive Director.
As usual, a very good presentation and very informative. Just a few comments. Still no. Just a few comments. First, as His Excellency Korean Ambassador reflected, investments, private investments could be expected to really grow coming to the election, because one good indicator that came out was that capital machineries, LCs are being opened, not settled yet, but that's an indication, because capital machinery is always a long-term type of decision. So maybe business is preparing, and when we talk to business, that is the sort of thing that is saying. So on the other issue of inflation and the tight monetary policy, I just like to give an example here. Pakistan went almost into the brink of bankruptcy. In 2.5 years' time, from an inflation rate of 48%, they've come to 3%, based on a very tight monetary policy, when they put the policy rate as high as 22%. Central Bank put the policy rate, and now they have come down to 11%. With inflation down, they're still holding it because external environment is not too conducive. So when central bank does that sort of, I think there is always, it's not just the supply side, there's also an external environment we are looking into. Other thing is that interest rates are high. Interest rates are high because the system made it high. With a broken down banking system, how do you make the things work out without a higher interest rate? Should that at that point Bangladesh Bank lower the policy rate to again create an arbitrage? These are things that has to be taken into consideration when talking of the overall. Other one issue, there are other issues, but another was what is growth issue? Growth is important. But at this point of time, is it growth or is it stabilizing the economy and putting it in the framework where it can grow further in the future? We should not go into a kind of boom and bust type of cycle. All of a sudden we think that and then we ease it up, and then all of a sudden we have a surge and then we again here because of external financing is still very precarious. It's still very precarious. So we have to go on that basis. So good thing is that the government is stabilizing, and it's not to be expected too much because they have a kind of a limited mandate. So they're trying to stabilize the economy, yes, at a lower economic level. And there is a big political thing that they have to settle also. So let's wait for the elections. I think we are in a point in a good state. It's a very difficult situation, poverty level, and that's a big challenge. Next biggest challenge will be how to, without the taxes coming up, without the revenue there, how do you handle it? So let's wait. But overall, I think it's a positive environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashik. Something that I was telling you, he just gave an example of what Pakistan did. 48% inflation brought it down to 3% with very tight monetary policy, high interest rates. So you see, the point is, inflation ke control korte hole, it should cost to us even pain us. It's painful, but for the economy, for the poor part of the population, there is pain. So unfortunately, but once you solve the inflation problem, it's beneficial to the poor. Because inflation is really a regressive tax on the poor. So once you solve it, the poor are benefiting more than the rich. So but there's pain from it. Thank you very much. I think move it's my distinct honor and pleasure to invite our chief guest, Dr. Monzur Hossain, member General Economic Division, with the rank of Secretary to the Government. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaidi. Thank you, Chair, for inviting me in this important event. And I also congratulate PRI and Dr. Ashik for his excellent presentation on the current macroeconomic insights. So the issues that we are concerned, I think almost all issues have been discussed, and all issues highlighted problems and concerns. So that is a good practice. I think it is, we always welcome, particularly from my side, to some sort of this kind of discussion from the private think tanks and other policy research institutes, so that government can take some policy inputs from this kind of discussion. I also want to highlight that discussion should not be only on the issues that are showing rosy pictures, but we also welcome some criticism that must be constructive and also policy-based, evidence-based and research-based kind of criticism would be, I think, helpful in this situation. The interim government, as you see, that after taking power after July uprising in August, I think we all know that what was the situation of our macroeconomic stability issues. The economy was in a dwindling situation. Macroeconomy was facing very much instabilities, and after 6 months, you can see that the economy started rebounding, and also macroeconomic stability now being restored. And the signs are very clear from today's even presentation that inflation has been easing down, exchange rate has been stabilized, which was struggling by the previous government for a long time. Also, reserve already built up to a certain level that is in a comfort zone. We are in a comfort zone. Balance requirement return to positive territory. So these are a good sign to some extent, but still there are concerns. One concern is that investment is not gearing up, as already highlighted in the presentation. Investment, I think I already discussed some. Investment is an issue that relates to a sort of ecosystem. It's not only one issue or two issues that can handle investment in overnight. It is we cannot expect that kind of thing. But what I wanted to see from this analysis, in fact, just describing secondary source macroeconomic data may not be very useful for us also, because these are available to all. I wanted to see, or I want to see in the future, to some sort of in-depth analysis of macroeconomic issues, particularly as businessmen and others are focusing on whether tight monetary stance is enough to curb inflation. That is an issue that needs to be further analyzed. For example, whether the monetary policy is effective in dealing with the inflation and how much it is contributing to inflation decline. So this, I think, needs to be analyzed. At the same time, it is also important how much interest rate is contributing to investment decline. Though there is a negative relationship between interest rate and investment, but whether this is true for Bangladesh or current situation, that type of analysis would be very much helpful for us. And also, it is important whether the public borrowing from the banking sector, I think it was missed in the analysis. It is now around 17%, whether private sector credit growth is around 6%, 7%, whether this public sector huge borrowing crowded out the private sector investment. That is also very important. So in our monthly economic update from the Zaidi, we do mention that this is something that has been crowding out to some extent the private sector credit growth, but that needs to be substantiated by some analysis. I think PRI, with its resources and other facilities, it is possible for them to do this kind of analysis. I think I wanted to see this kind of analysis. And also, if it is useful for PRI, if they can do their own projections on growth and other things without discussing what World Bank says and IMF says and these kind of things. And that would be very useful for you to, in the future, to build your capacity in this kind of local capacity, particularly. But we are always depending on the multilateral, bilateral donors and development partners. We need to come out from this kind of things. I think most of the issues have been discussed about banking sector, central bank independence. That is another issue. I think I am in favor of that kind of argument, but we also need to think about the reality. In countries like ours, I think there should have a very close coordination between monetary authority and fiscal authority. And also, only independence may not be enough, as we have seen in the previous autocratic regime or repressive regime, that if your system doesn't work, nothing can help you to achieve the goal. So this is a very important part. Again, I congratulate and thank for inviting me in this event. Now I try to say something in Bangla to for media and other Bangladeshi colleagues. একটা হচ্ছে যে বাংলাদেশ সরকার এই অন্তর্বর্তীকালীন সরকার ক্ষমতা আসার পর থেকে বর্তমান সময়ে আপনারা জানেন যে সামষ্টিক অর্থনীতির একটা স্থিতিশীলতা আমরা অর্জন করতে পেরেছি, ইনফ্লেশন কমে আসছে, এক্সচেঞ্জ রেট অনেকটাই স্টেবিলিটি অর্জন করেছে, রিজার্ভ বেড়েছে, সুতরাং এগুলোকে অ্যাপ্রিসিয়েট করার মতো অবস্থা। কিন্তু অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম যেটা দরকার যে আমরা এগুলোই যথেষ্ট নয় এবং আমাদেরকে আরো এগিয়ে যেতে হবে, যেমন ইনভেস্টমেন্ট সেভাবে এগুচ্ছে না। এর পিছনে হয়তো অনেকগুলো কারণ আছে, তার মধ্যে ইন্টারেস্ট রেট কতটুকু কন্ট্রিবিউট করছে এটা দেখা দরকার। আমার মনে হয় যে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক যে মনিটারি পলিসি, টাইট মনিটারি পলিসি স্ট্যান্স নিয়েছে, এটা হয়তো কন্টিনিউ করতে পারে আরো কিছু সময়, কিন্তু আমার মনে হয় যে এটা আরেকটু রিল্যাক্স করা দরকার। ইন্টারেস্ট রেট কিভাবে কমিয়ে আনা যায় সে ব্যাপারে আরো পদক্ষেপ নেওয়া দরকার হতে পারে, এবং তা যদি না করা যায় আসলে ইনভেস্টমেন্ট সেভাবে বাড়বে বলে আমার মনে হয়। এবং আরো যেটা বেশি দরকার যে ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরের যে বিষয়টা, সেখানে কনফিডেন্সটা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। সরকার একটা মার্জ করার একটা পরিকল্পনা নিয়েছে 5টা ব্যাংকে, কিন্তু এই ব্যাংকগুলোকে যাতে জনগণ এদের উপর আস্থা বেড়ে পায় সেই ব্যাপারে আরো পদক্ষেপ নেওয়া দরকার আছে, এবং যেটা মানে দ্রুত এই বিষয়ে পদক্ষেপ নেওয়া দরকার আছে, যাতে করে ইভেন ইনভেস্টমেন্টও কিন্তু এর সাথে জড়িত, এবং ইনভেস্টমেন্ট বাড়ার জন্য কিন্তু ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরকে একটু আগের জায়গায় ফিরিয়ে আনা দরকার আছে। আর সবচেয়ে বড় কথা হলো যে এডিপি ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনের কথা বলা হয়েছে। এই বছর এডিপি ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশন কিছুটা ইনিশিয়ালি কম হলো, এখন গিয়ার আপ হয়েছে, অনেকটা বেড়েছে। এবং এটার একটা বড় কারণ হচ্ছে যে বর্তমান সময় চেক অ্যান্ড ব্যালেন্সটা আগের চেয়ে অনেক বাড়ানো হয়েছে। সুতরাং আমার আগের সাথে তুলনা করলে হবে না, সেখানে যে ধরনের খরচ হতো, যে ধরনের কস্ট ওভাররান ছিল, টাইম ওভাররান ছিল, সেখান থেকে বেরিয়ে এসে যেটাকে আরো স্ক্রুটিনির মধ্যে আনা হয়েছে। সুতরাং স্ক্রুটিনি যখন আনা হয় তখন একটু হলেও একটু ধীর গতিতে ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনটা হয়, কিন্তু আমরা আশা করছি যে বাই দ্য এন্ড অফ ইয়ার এটা আরো দ্রুত গতি পাবে এবং গত বছরের চাইতে হয়তো আরো ভালোভাবে এডিপি ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনের দিকে যাওয়া হবে। আর বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের স্বাধীনতার কথা বলা হচ্ছে, এটা খুবই টাইমলি একটা ডিসকাশন। আমি ব্যক্তিগতভাবে এটা সাপোর্ট করি, কিন্তু কথা হলো যে এই স্বাধীনতা যেন আমরা স্বাধীনতা বলতে কি বোঝায় সেই বিষয়টা খুব ক্লিয়ার হতে হবে। এখানে দুটো জিনিস খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। কেন্দ্রীয় ব্যাংকের সাথে সরকারের, বিশেষ করে রাজস্ব বিভাগে যেটা, তার কোঅর্ডিনেশনটা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ এবং সেই কোঅর্ডিনেশনটা রাখতে হবে। এট দ্য সেম টাইম যাতে যোগ্য লোককে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের গভর্নর পজিশনে বসানো যায় সেদিকে খেয়াল রাখতে হবে। এবং তার সাথে সাথে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকেরও যাতে মানে অ্যাকাউন্টেবিলিটি থাকে, জবাবদিহিতা তৈরি হয়, সেই জায়গাগুলো কিন্তু এনশিওর করতে হবে। বিশেষ করে মনিটারি বোর্ড যেটা হয় যাতে ক্রেডিবল হয়, যিনি বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক যাতে এতে করে আবার বিশেষ করে এটা কি বলা যায়, অটোক্রেট না হয়ে যায় তাদের সিদ্ধান্তের ক্ষেত্রে, সেই জায়গাগুলো যাতে একটা চেক এন্ড ব্যালেন্স থাকে সেদিকেও দেখতে হবে। কিন্তু আমরা আশা করি যে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক অতীতেও আমার মনে হয় গত দুই গভর্নরের আগ পর্যন্ত আমার মনে হয় বাংলাদেশ ভালোই চলেছে এবং এমন কিছু হয়নি যাতে করে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক সিদ্ধান্ত নিতে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছে। ফিনান্সিয়াল ইনস্টিটিউশন ডিপার্টমেন্ট ডিভিশন যেটা এফআইডি নিয়ে অনেকেই কথা বলে, আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে এফআইডি ইজ এ বিগ প্রবলেম। এফআইডি থাকলেই যে সমস্যা হচ্ছে তা না, এখানে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকের নিজস্ব অটোনমি কিন্তু অ্যাচিভ করতে হয়, স্বাধীনতা অর্জন করতে হয়। স্বাধীনতা দিলেই যে স্বাধীনতা পাওয়া যায় আমরা এমনও দেখেছি আগের কোন এক গভর্নর হোটেলে যে মনিটারি পলিসি ডিক্টেটেড হচ্ছে বিজনেসম্যানদের দ্বারা, তারা বিজনেসম্যানদের দ্বারা মানে ঘেরাও হয়ে থাকতো, তাদের মাধ্যমে সরকারি সিদ্ধান্তগুলো নেওয়া হতো। তো এই ধরনের সিচুয়েশন থেকে বের হতে হলে যিনি এই দায়িত্বে থাকবেন তাকে যেমন নিজস্ব তার একটা স্বকীয়তা থাকতে হবে, তাকে বুঝতে হবে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকিং কি জিনিস, তাকে বুঝতে হবে মনিটারি পলিসি কি জিনিস এবং সে যোগ্যতা সম্পন্ন লোকও থাকতে হবে। সুতরাং এই বিষয়গুলো খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। আমার মনে হয় না যে পলিটিক্যালি খুব বেশি কমিটমেন্টের অভাব থাকে, অন্তত আগে যে কোনো সরকারি বলে, কিন্তু সেটা অ্যাচিভ করার মতো সেই যোগ্য লোকদেরকে যোগ্য জায়গায় দেওয়া হয়নি এবং দেওয়া হয়নি বলেই সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকের স্বাধীনতার কথা বলা হচ্ছে। কিন্তু আমি জানি না সরকার কিভাবে নিবে, তবে যদি কিছুটা চেক এন্ড ব্যালেন্স করে যদি আরো কিছু ইমপ্রুভ করা যায় সেটা অবশ্যই আমরা সাধুবাদ জানি। আমি ব্যক্তিগতভাবে আশা করি যে সেদিক থেকে দেখতে হবে। যেমন বর্তমান সময় যে মনিটারি স্ট্যান্সটা নেওয়া হচ্ছে, টাইট মনিটারি স্ট্যান্স, সরকারের পক্ষ থেকে কিন্তু সেভাবে হস্তক্ষেপ করা হচ্ছে না, কিন্তু এই বিষয়টা আলোচনার দাবি রাখে যে এই টাইট মনিটারি পলিসি স্ট্যান্স আসলে কতদিন কন্টিনিউ করা হবে। ইনফ্লেশন যে কমছে সেটা কি মনিটারি পলিসি স্ট্যান্সের জন্য কমছে, নাকি রাইস প্রাইসের জন্য কমছে, নাকি সাপ্লাই সাইডের ইমপ্রুভমেন্টের জন্য কমছে, এই অ্যানালাইসিসটা হওয়া দরকার। অ্যানালাইসিস ছাড়া আমরা কন্টিনিউ করতে পারি রাইট মনিটারি পলিসি, সেক্ষেত্রে আরো 2-3 বছর লাগবে হয়তো এক্সপেক্টেড লেভেল ইনফ্লেশন হতে, ততদিন কি আমাদের অর্থনীতিকে এফোর্ড করতে পারবে ইনভেস্টমেন্ট ছাড়া হাই ইন্টারেস্ট রেটে একটা এনভায়রনমেন্ট? এই জায়গাগুলোতে কিভাবে আরো মেকানিজমটা ডেভেলপ করা যায় সে বিষয়ে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকের একটা মেকানিজম থাকা দরকার। সেখানে যে মনিটারি বোর্ড আছে বর্তমানে তাতে 5 জন আছে, হয়তো 3 জনই হচ্ছে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের অভ্যন্তরীণ কর্মকর্তা, তাহলে সেক্ষেত্রে ভোটিং পাওয়ার বলে কিছু না। তো এই জায়গাগুলো খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ যে ভবিষ্যতে যে মনিটারি পলিসি যদি নিতে হয়, এটা যদি স্বাধীনভাবে নিতে হয়, তাহলে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের যে বোর্ড অফ ডিরেক্টরস আছে সেটাও খুব আমি মনে করি সুশক্তিশালী হতে হবে। সেখানে ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্টলি পলিসি নেওয়ার ক্ষেত্রে স্বাধীনতার চর্চা থাকতে হবে। এট দ্য সেম টাইম মনিটারি বোর্ড থাকতে হবে, তাদের রিসার্চ ডিপার্টমেন্টকে ডেভেলপ করতে হবে, ক্যাপাসিটি বিল্ডিং করতে হবে এবং এক্সচেঞ্জ রেট পলিসির ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখেছি কি মিসম্যানেজমেন্টটা হয়েছে। সুতরাং তাদের নিজস্ব ক্যাপাসিটি বিল্ডিং ও খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। স্বাধীনতা শুধু মুখের কথায় কাগজের কথায় অর্জিত হয় না, স্বাধীনতাকে অর্জন করতে হলে তার সাথে সাথে ইনস্টিটিউশনাল যে ডেভেলপমেন্ট সেটা খুব জরুরি দরকার বলে আমি মনে করি। আর সবচেয়ে বড় কথা হলো যে এই ধরনের মনিটারি পলিসি ইনসাইটস গুলো আমি খুব ওয়েলকাম করি, কিন্তু এখানে সমালোচনা আরো থাকা দরকার। এটা অনেকটা লুকস লাইক মোর গভর্নমেন্ট ডকুমেন্টস। আমার কাছে তেমন কোনো সমালোচনা আমি খুব পাইনি, কিন্তু সমালোচনা করার জন্য যে ধরনের রিসার্চ বেসড ইনসাইট দরকার সেটাও আমার মনে হয় যে সামনে ভবিষ্যতে আশা করি যে থাকবে। তাতে করে আমরা আরো ক্লিয়ারলি বুঝতে পারবো আসলে কোন পলিসিটা কোন কিভাবে সরকারের বা কিভাবে আউটকাম গুলো এফেক্ট করছে। ফর এক্সাম্পল আমি যেটা বলছিলাম যে টাইট পলিসি রেট 10% ধরলে তার ইন্টারেস্ট রেটটা বাড়ছে, তার ট্রান্সমিশন চ্যানেলটা কি, যেটার দ্বারা মনিটারি পলিসি এফেক্ট করছে ইনফ্লেশনকে, এটাকে থ্রো ইন্টারেস্ট রেট নাকি ক্রেডিট চ্যানেল নাকি অন্য কিছু? তাহলে এটা এগুলো যদি আমরা বুঝতে পারি তাহলে এই ধরনের ইনসাইট গুলো, এই ধরনের ডকুমেন্ট গুলো সরকারের জন্য খুব হেল্পফুল হবে। আমি তারপরেও মনে করি যে এই ধরনের আলোচনা হওয়া উচিত উইথ অল লিমিটেশনস, প্রত্যেকেরই আছে, কিন্তু আশা করি যে পিআরআই তার যে রিসোর্স আছে, তাদের যে হিউম্যান রিসোর্স আছে, ফিনান্সিয়াল রিসোর্স আছে, তা ইউজ করে আরো ভালো ডকুমেন্ট বের করবে এবং সেটা হয়তো সরকারের সাথেও শেয়ার করবে। আজকে আমার আসার কারণে হয়তো ওইটাই। I again express my gratitude to our chairman of the PRI and also to all who have attended this program. এটুকু বলে আমি ধন্যবাদ জানাই শেষ করতে হচ্ছে।
আপনাকে অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ। আপনি আমাদেরকে বেশ কয়েকটা উপদেশ দিয়েছেন, এগুলো আমাদেরকে পালন করা উচিত, আমাদের চেষ্টা আমরা করবো। বাট ইউ আর অ্যাবসলিউটলি রাইট। আপনাদের সুবিধা হবে যদি আমরা মানে ক্রিটিক্যাল অ্যানালিসিস গুলো করি এবং ইনসাইটস গুলো দেই, জাস্ট নট প্রেজেন্টিং ডেটা, কারণ ডেটা এখন প্রায় সবাই কাছে চলে আসে কম বেশি। সো আপনার উপদেশগুলো আমরা সবাই নিচ্ছি। তো আমার একটু 5 মিনিটের একটু কনক্লুডিং রিমার্কস দেওয়ার কথা আছে, সো আপনাদেরকে বেশিক্ষণ রাখবো না। আমি দুটো পয়েন্টে একটু ইয়ে করতে চাই, সেটা হচ্ছে যে পভার্টির ব্যাপারে এই কথাটা বলেছে ডক্টর খন্দকার। ইটস ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট। পভার্টি লেটেস্ট যে ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক নাকি অ্যাসেসমেন্ট করেছে পভার্টি এবং পভার্টি অ্যান্ড ইকুইটি বলছে, তার মানে পভার্টিতে আমাদের কিছু সমস্যাটা বেড়ে গেছে, কারণ পভার্টি একটু বেড়ে গেছে বলে রিপোর্ট হচ্ছে। দ্বিতীয়ত হচ্ছে ইনইকুয়ালিটিটা বেড়ে গেছে সাংঘাতিক ভাবে। এখানে মানে নজর না দিলেই নয়, এটা দিস ইজ এ ভেরি ক্রিটিক্যাল। বাংলাদেশে এরকম ইনইকুয়ালিটি আগে ছিল না। আমরা তো ইনকাম জিনি দিয়ে কাজ করতাম, তখন আগে যেখানে 0.30 ছিল সেখানে ইনকাম জিনিসটা এসে গেছে প্রায় 0.50-তে, আর কনসামশন জিনিস যেখানে কম ছিল, যেটা 0.30 মতো ছিল, সেটাও নাকি এখন ডক্টর খন্দকার বলেন 0.36 এসে গেছে। দ্যাট ইজ রিয়েলি ওখানে আমাদের যথেষ্ট কাজ আছে, আমার মনে হয় পলিসি মেকারসদের টেনশন একটু দিতে হবে। দ্বিতীয় ইস্যু এই যে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংক ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্সের ব্যাপারে এখন যথেষ্ট আলোচনা হয়েছে, আমাদের চিফ গেস্টও একটু বলেছেন। সেখানে আমার একটু ইকোনমিক পলিসি রিলেটেড বক্তব্য আছে। গভর্নেন্স আমরা সবাই এগ্রি করি যে as far as governance is concerned, central bank should be autonomous. এখানে মানে উপযুক্ত মানে কোয়ালিফাইড কিন্তু গভর্নর হওয়া উচিত, and it should be মানে এই সিস্টেমের মধ্যে একটা সিস্টেম থাকা উচিত, সিলেকশন অফ গভর্নর, ডেপুটি গভর্নর। সো গভর্নেন্স ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্স অটোনমি আমার কোনো সমস্যা নেই, কিন্তু পলিসি মেকিং এ বাংলাদেশের একটা চ্যালেঞ্জ আছে, I'm going to point out what is the challenge. এখানে বাংলাদেশ is a developing economy, okay? Bangladesh runs fiscal deficit. Bangladesh, every country runs fiscal deficits, including developed economies. এখন এই বাংলাদেশের fiscal deficits গুলো not because we have low revenue GDP ratio. নেপালের কথা বলা হয় যে 18% of GDP ওদের revenue GDP ratio. Nepal runs a fiscal deficit of 8-9%. So আমাদের কিন্তু fiscal deficit has been very prudent, within 5%. কিন্তু এই 5% deficitটা কেন আসছে? It's not because we are spending on revenue expenditure আমাদের জন্য, আমরা তো ওখানে deficit করি না, আমাদের deficitটা আসছে development expenditure এর জন্য। আমাদের deficit is actually destined for our annual development program. সেখানে so আমরা we are investing, this deficit is actually invested in development. আমাদের as a developing economy we have to do that. So এখন ইস্যু হচ্ছে যে how do we finance that deficit? Okay, আমরা ধরে নিই 5% আমাদের deficit আছে, এটা 2% of GDP multilateral aid থেকে আসছে, তারপরে কিছু bilateral loans ও আসছে। এটা একটা ভালো মানে it's a low cost financing of this deficit. কিন্তু বাকি যে 3% অফ জিডিপি যে ডেফিসিট আছে এখানে ফাইন্যান্স করতে হলে তিনটা উপায় আছে। একটা হচ্ছে borrowing from the public, মানে গভর্নমেন্টের, borrowing from the public, borrowing from the banking system, borrowing from the central bank। এই তিনটা আছে, and তিনটাই কিন্তু মনিটারি পলিসিতে এফেক্ট করে। borrowing from the public ওই যে সঞ্চয়পত্র দিয়ে নিতে হলে ইন্টারেস্ট রেটটা ফিক্স করে দিতে হয় এবং ইন্টারেস্ট রেটটা মার্কেট ইন্টারেস্ট রেটের উপরে থাকে, and that affects overall lending policies of the bank এবং ইন্টারেস্ট রেট। সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে borrowing from the banking system, ওইটা করতে গেলে বেশি borrowing করতে গেলে that would crowd out private investment এবং so you have to be limited, but you've got a fiscal deficit, you've got a development program that has to be financed. Lastly, the government has to borrow from the central bank. এখন central bank borrowing the worst in terms of inflation. It's purely inflationary. It creates high-powered money এবং এটা inflationary একদম one-to-one. So এখন issue হচ্ছে যে can the central bank independently conduct monetary policy when we have fiscal deficits that actually are destined for our development program? এইখানে এই চ্যালেঞ্জটা আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট বলেছেন fiscal monetary coordination ছাড়া কোনো উপায় নেই, বাট ওইখানে central bank cannot become so independent that they can say to tell the government, ভাই আমরা কোনো zero, আমরা কোনো lending দেব না, we are not the lender of last resort or the first resort. We are not. Eta our mone hai na. It's not realistic. I think only he used the word realistic. Our mone is not realistic. So this is a challenge that we will face in the future if we discuss the independence of the central bank. This is a policy issue rather than a governance issue. So on the governance part, I think we all agree that central bank autonomy and independence is required. And আমরা যা দেখেছি, turning the central bank into a rogue central bank with the connivance, with the collusion of the government, we have to ring fence the future central bank so that doesn't happen. That's for sure. So anybody, I invite you. There's some lunch. I invite you.
Press type 2 আমাদের chair
আর কি ও আচ্ছা একটা আপনাকে একটা আমাদের ছোট্ট
ছবি টবি তো নিতে পারে।
হ্যাঁ একটু ছবিও তুলবে তো। With our gratitude.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. That's extremely informative.
After that,